Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. I would like to thank the guys from Wall Street Silver. They invited me on their show the other day. We had an excellent conversation. I will leave a link down in the description. I would appreciate it if you guys went over and checked out the Wall Street Silver YouTube channel. Give them a subscription. Thumbs up the video and go and give them a comment. Let them know how much you appreciate them inviting the Uneducated Economist onto their show. Now, wanted to talk a little bit about the research I was doing, looking for articles talking about the bond defaults coming out of China. Now, these bond defaults that are coming out of China, these are corporations that have issued out debt using US dollars. They are due back in dollars. And this issue of corporations that are defaulting like crazy over there is causing a demand for dollars. Now, when I was searching out this information, I came across this website, fedguide.com, and there was an excellent article, and it was titled China Repo Facility. This was an excellent piece. Now, it's a little complicated, so I'm going to try and break it down uneducated economist style. And really what this has to do with is the Federal Reserve has two things going on. They got the domestic monetary policy that they're trying to deal with, and then they're trying to also provide the world with the world reserve currency, which basically has them kind of leaning in two different directions. Do you tighten the monetary supply, or do you provide the world with dollars? How do you do this? Now, let me see if I can break this down. A lot of people, they have a hard time wrapping their mind around the idea that there is dollars being used outside of the United States. Like, banking systems outside of the United States use dollars as part of their banking system. Like, they use dollars as part of their assets and treasuries as part of their assets. All this dollar-denominated debt has a demand for dollars as a world reserve currency that has the Federal Reserve they're forever trying to provide the world with a currency. But at the same time, they're trying to deal with irrational exuberance and asset price inflation and all kinds of stuff here in the United States. So how do you provide the world with a currency while at the same time maintain a monetary policy? Now, what they have done is they have set up facilities so that central banks around the world can access dollars through the Federal Reserve. Like, they don't have to go to the markets and try and acquire dollars. They can go straight to the Federal Reserve. Now, this is the FX swap facility, and it's only really available to the major players, Canada and Japan and UK, the major players out there. They can print up their money and use that as a collateral to get loans, dollar loans from the Federal Reserve. Places that don't have access to it, like China, they have to come up with dollars in another way. So when their banking system is in demand of dollars, they have to go to their government to get the dollars. And if their government doesn't have dollars, the government has to then sell treasuries or something to try and figure out how it is that they are going to acquire the dollars that they need to loan to the banks so that they can have the dollars that they need inside of their banking system. Now, I know this is a tough one, guys, but just try and follow me just a minute on it. This FX swap facility, it's limited to, like I said, just a handful of players out there. But China, when they want to start acquiring dollars and they're selling these treasuries, this can create an issue inside of the treasury market that the Federal Reserve doesn't really want to see happening, because it can get to a point of crisis. Like, normal everyday functioning of buying and selling treasuries is not a big deal. But when it comes down to a point where there's a dollar crisis and there's a huge demand for dollars out there and people are selling their assets, trying to acquire as many dollars as they can get, as much cash as they can get, and China being one of them who may fall into this particular situation in which that they have to sell a lot of treasuries in order to acquire the dollars that they need, that situation right there can cause a liquidity issue inside of the treasury markets. Now, typically, this is something that wouldn't happen because treasuries are almost as good as cash. I mean, they're pretty much as liquid as anything could get. But if there came into a situation where a lot of people are selling treasuries because they're in demand of dollars, well, then that can create a liquidity issue as far as being having a market that has enough cash to buy all those treasuries out there. And that can turn into a very serious issue. Now, in order to prevent something like this from happening, what the Federal Reserve has set up is something called the FIMA. Now, I'm not sure if they're referring to this as FIMA or FIMA or whatever, but it stands for the Foreign International Monetary Authority. Now, if you understand the repo facility, like the standing repo facility, and how the Federal Reserve had stepped up and started handing treasuries and taking cash from the big banks and the monetary fund right now, if you understand that system, then you probably understand how the overnight repo facility was working back in 2019, September of 2019, where the treasuries were in overabundance and the cash was limited. So remember when they were taking the treasuries from these banks and handing them cash on an overnight reverse or on an overnight repo? That same type of facility is now occurring with China. Okay, now I know this kind of seems confusing and stuff like that, but now China doesn't have to sell those treasuries. You get it? They can basically go to the Federal Reserve and do a reverse or do an overnight repo where they can hand the Federal Reserve treasuries and get cash. Now they can loan that cash into the system or have the cash on hand that they need in order to provide the liquidity that they need for their banking system. Very interesting to think about. Now, if this is the situation that has taken place, it leads me to believe that the idea of there being like a sell-off in treasuries becomes less likely. Like, they could be used as a weapon. Like, if China ever got like really mad at the United States and they were going to try and like damage the United States by selling treasuries, they could still do that. But the problem with selling treasuries and causing the price of the treasuries to drop and the yields to rise is that you're essentially destroying your own asset. You're causing your own asset prices to fall. So it's not like a very smart move to do that unless you're willing to take a loss on your assets, which, you know, most people aren't willing to do, unless, and like I said, unless it was like a weapon. But if you're just doing just everyday business, selling treasuries in order to acquire the cash is not going to do you very well when the asset price begins to fall. But if you could swap it essentially with the Federal Reserve, then you can acquire the cash you need without causing the asset prices to fall. Kind of makes sense? Very interesting article. I thought this one was an excellent piece, and I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around the idea of how this FIMA or FIMA or this Foreign and International Monetary Authority, how it is that this idea can expand farther beyond just China. Like, if this facility is in play all the time, if it's like the standing facility like it is now, could this prevent, essentially, is the Federal Reserve attempting to prevent any kind of like dollar crisis as far as like selling assets off in order to acquire dollars, when instead of selling those assets off, you could actually just go and swap it to the Federal Reserve on an overnight repo? Does any of that make sense? Did I say that all right? Uneducated Economist. Links are down in the description. You let me know.